I asked when the wedding was, and my daughter-in-law said, "We got married yesterday." For a moment, I thought she was joking. There was a pause, the kind of silence that stretches, fragile and unreal, before the meaning landed like a stone in water, sinking all the way down. Yesterday. The word didn't even sound real. It hung in the air between us, soft, final. I was standing in my kitchen when she said it. The window behind her glowed with late afternoon light, the kind that turns everything gold just before it disappears. The kettle was whistling, the smell of burnt toast drifted from the toaster. And she, Emily, stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, as if she were waiting for me to either cry or curse or laugh. Instead, I just stared at her. "We got married yesterday," she said again, quieter this time, her voice trembling a little at the edges. It was small. Small. A word that never hurt before. There are sentences that split your life into two halves, before and after. That was one of them. Before. I was planning to ask when they wanted to set a date, whether I could help with flowers or the dress or something that might make me feel part of it all. I'd even cleaned out the dining room, thinking I might host an engagement dinner. After, I was just a woman standing in a quiet kitchen, realizing her son had started a new chapter of his life without her name even in the acknowledgements. I remember gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. The refrigerator hummed like a heartbeat in the background. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where? Who was they? Why didn't you tell me? But I couldn't seem to find my voice. She looked sorry. That was the worst part. Not smug, not defensive, just sorry. "Ben wanted to tell you himself," she said softly. He couldn't. Couldn't, I repeated, though it came out as more of a whisper. Outside, the wind moved through the maple trees, carrying the sound of leaves scraping the driveway. I thought of all the times Ben used to rake those leaves with me, laughing, throwing them into the air like confetti. And now, he was someone's husband. The toast popped up, blackened. The smoke alarm chirped, sharp and shrill. I waved at it, turned off the stove, did everything except look at her. When I finally met her eyes again, she was already putting her coat back on. "I'm sorry," she said once more. I nodded, because there was nothing else to do. After she left, the house felt impossibly still. The kind of stillness that hums under your skin, like grief waiting to name itself. I found out later, not from her, but from a Facebook post, that they'd married in a courthouse downtown. Ben wore a navy suit. Emily, a simple ivory dress. They looked radiant, uncomplicated, complete. And that's when I realized something I'd never said out loud before. Sometimes the people you love the most move on quietly, like they owe you no explanation at all. That was the night everything changed. The morning after Emily told me, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun came up, staring at the cold coffee in my mug. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, tick, the sound of time, indifferent as ever. It's funny how you can live somewhere for 20 years and not really see it until the silence turns everything into an exhibit. The chipped paint near the pantry door where Ben used to mark his height every birthday. The dent in the refrigerator where David had once dropped a skillet and cursed so loudly we both laughed. The faint smell of pine from the candle I kept lighting even though it was summer. Every corner held a memory, but none of them felt alive anymore. Ben used to call me every Sunday. That was our thing. He'd start with, "Hey, Mom. How's the house?" As though the house were the real patient here, and I was just the nurse making sure it didn't fall apart. I'd tell him about the leaking faucet, the neighbor's dog, the new church choir I'd joined. He'd listen, polite but distracted, and I'd hear the sound of typing in the background, the hum of another world pulling at him. When he met Emily, the calls got shorter. Then came texts instead of calls. And then, sometimes, nothing at all. I don't blame her, at least not completely. I remember when I first met her. Ben brought her over one 4th of July. She was polite, careful, trying too hard to make a good impression. I liked her well enough. Pretty, smart, a little nervous. The kind of girl you want to protect. She brought a blueberry pie. Store-bought, I could tell, but she'd transferred it into a glass dish to make it look homemade. That small effort somehow made me love her more. I told her it was delicious, and she smiled, relieved, like she'd just passed some unspoken test. That evening, we sat out on the porch watching the fireworks. Ben had his arm around her, and I remember thinking, he looks like his father when he smiles like that. David used to tilt his head the same way, as if joy came from the neck, not the heart. When the last spark faded from the sky, I turned to Ben and said, "She's the one, isn't she?" He grinned. "Maybe. But I could already tell. David died 10 years ago. Heart attack, quick and cruel. One moment he was there, pouring his coffee, the next he was on the kitchen floor, his cup shattered beside him. I did CPR until my hands cramped. The paramedics told me I'd done everything right, but how do you ever believe that? For months afterward, I kept hearing the echo of that morning, the crash of the cup, the way his body fell against the linoleum. I scrubbed the stain out of the floor, but the sound never left. Ben was 20 then, old enough to be brave, young enough to break. He came home from college for the funeral and stayed 3 weeks longer than he needed to, as if afraid I might stop breathing too. We didn't talk much about it. That's how grief works in our family. Quiet, practical, like folding laundry. He helped me with the insurance paperwork, fixed the broken porch light, mowed the lawn. And then, one morning, he hugged me and said, "I think I should go back now." And I said, "Of course." Even though every cell in my body wanted to scream, "Don't you dare leave me here alone with his ghost." He left anyway. People assume loss happens all at once. One day, one event, one goodbye. But it doesn't. It happens slowly, in small doses, over years. It happens every time the phone doesn't ring. Every time you set an extra plate on the table out of habit. Every time you look at your child and realize you don't know their favorite song anymore. By the time Emily came into his life, I think I was already preparing to be left behind. I just didn't know it would happen this quietly. A few days after she told me about the wedding, I drove to the lake, the one Ben used to fish at with his dad. The air smelled of rain and pine needles. The water was still, mirroring the gray sky perfectly, as if the earth itself couldn't decide where it ended. I sat on the old wooden bench, tracing the initials carved into it, B+M, from when Ben was 15 and in love with a girl named Madison. She'd broken his heart 3 weeks later, but the letters remained. It hit me then, how each version of him lived somewhere. In the photo albums, in the walls of this house, in the lakeside carvings, in the spaces between one phone call and the next. And yet the version I'd been saving in my heart, the boy who needed me, was long gone. When I got home, I opened the old storage box in the attic. Inside were Ben's report cards, his baseball glove, and a Father's Day card he'd made in kindergarten. A shaky crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. Mommy, Daddy, and me. I traced the lines, wondering if I'd kept him too close all those years, or if I'd let him drift too far. That night, I called him. I told myself I just wanted to hear his voice. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, sweetheart." I just wanted to say congratulations. There was a pause, the kind of pause that carries the weight of everything you don't say. "Thanks," he said finally. "I was going to call you." "Were you?" He sighed. Emily thought, it might be easier this way. Less pressure. Easier for who? He didn't answer. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, I said, "Well, I hope you're happy. That's all that matters." "I am," he said, but his voice sounded far away, like it was coming through a tunnel. When we hung up, I sat in the dark and cried for the first time since David's funeral. Not the kind of crying that feels cleansing, the kind that makes you realize how much you've been pretending to be fine. The next morning, I went to church. Not for comfort, not really, just for the routine. The smell of wax and hymnals, the hollow sound of the organ, the way light filters through stained glass like forgiveness in color. Pastor Ruth came over after the service. "You all right, Maggie?" she asked, her eyes soft. I nodded. "My son got married." "Well, that's wonderful news," she said, smiling. "Yes," I said. "It is." And somehow, saying it out loud, that one simple sentence, felt like pressing on a bruise. That week, I started baking again. Banana bread, mostly. David used to love the smell of it. Ben, too. I left one loaf on the counter, another in the freezer, just in case they visited, even though I knew they wouldn't. Every evening, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sun go down behind the trees, the light bleeding into gold, then gray. The neighbors' kids played catch across the street. Their laughter floated through the air, the same way Ben's once had. Sometimes, I could almost see him there, 10 years old, running barefoot, calling for me to watch. "Look, Mom! I caught it!" "Be careful, Benny!" I got it. The echo of his voice still lives here, in the space between the trees and my memory. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting. Emily's. "Dear Margaret, I'm sorry you had to find out the way you did. It all happened fast, faster than we planned. It wasn't meant to hurt you. We just wanted something simple, private. I hope someday you can understand that. We'd love for you to come over soon. Ben misses you. So do I. Love, Emily. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My first instinct was to crumble it up, not out of anger, but because it felt too fragile to exist in my hands. But instead, I folded it carefully and placed it in my journal. Because maybe, in some small way, this was the start of something again. Not the same as before. Something quieter. Something tentative. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about David, how he'd have known what to say, how he would have handled it with more grace, more laughter. He always knew how to bridge the space between pride and pain. I whispered into the dark, "You'd be proud of him, you know." And for a moment, I swore I felt him there, not as presence, not as ghost, but as warmth. A faint pulse of memory. Then I fell asleep, and in my dream, Ben was small again. Standing by the lake, waving at me. "Come on, Mom. Let's go." And for once, I didn't hesitate. I ran toward him. It was 2 weeks later when Ben called. I was in the garden, trimming the hydrangeas that had started to wilt early that summer. The phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and when I saw his name, my hands trembled so much I almost dropped the shears. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was warm, careful, like someone testing thin ice. "Ben." A pause. "Then, we were thinking of coming by this weekend. Emily's got some time off. Thought maybe we could visit, have dinner." I could hear a bird calling somewhere above me. The sky was that kind of washed-out blue that makes you feel nostalgic for no reason. "That would be nice," I said. "Saturday." "Yeah, Saturday's perfect." He hesitated before hanging up, as if waiting for me to say something more. "Maybe I'm proud of you or I miss you." But I couldn't make the words come. My heart was fluttering too fast, my mind already spinning toward what I'd cook, what I'd wear, what I'd say. After we hung up, I stood there among the flowers, the pruning shears still open in my hand. And I cried, not out of sadness, but from the unbearable relief of finally being seen again, even for a weekend. That Saturday morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was buzzing with nervous energy, or maybe that was just me. I ironed the tablecloth David's mother had given us for our wedding. It had tiny embroidered daisies along the edges. I roasted chicken with lemon and rosemary, mashed the potatoes the way Ben liked them, and baked an apple pie from scratch. By the time the clock struck 2, the house smelled like cinnamon and old love. They arrived at 3:30. I watched from the window as their car pulled up the gravel drive, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Emily stepped out first, wearing a pale blue dress, her hair tied up neatly. Ben followed, carrying a bottle of wine and the same easy grin that used to undo me when he was 5. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mom," Ben said, smiling. "You look great." I didn't. I looked like someone who hadn't slept in 2 days and had tried to make up for it with blush and hope. But still, I smiled. "You made it." Emily leaned in for a hug. "It's so good to see you, Margaret." Her perfume was soft and floral. It made me ache a little. Inside, everything felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a room when people don't know what to say. "Dinner smells amazing," Ben said, taking in the table. "Your favorite," I said, setting out the last dish. I remembered. He smiled. "You always do." We ate. We talked, about nothing and everything. The weather. Their new apartment in Seattle. Emily's job at the hospital. The trip they were planning to Portland. I nodded, smiled, asked questions, but every word felt rehearsed, like we were all playing parts in a polite little play titled How to Be a Family Again. Ben seemed different. Not worse, not better, just older. Quieter. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and there was a new caution in the way he spoke, as though every sentence had been weighed before it left his mouth. Emily, on the other hand, was effortlessly kind. She laughed softly, complimented my cooking, asked for the pie recipe. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her glancing at Ben, quick, worried glances that said more than she intended. After dinner, Ben offered to help with the dishes. "Go on," I told him. "I've got it." But he stayed, leaning against the counter while I washed. "It's good to be back here," he said quietly. "I've missed this house." I glanced over my shoulder. "It's missed you too." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been doing okay." As okay as one can be when their son gets married without telling them. The words slipped out before I could stop them. His face fell. "Mom." "I'm sorry," I said quickly. That was unkind. Forget I said it. He set the dish towel down. No. You have every right to be upset. I should have called. I wanted to, but I don't know. It just happened fast. Everything does, these days. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Emily thought maybe you'd take it hard. I didn't want to hurt you. And did it work? He looked away. Guess not. For a moment, the only sound was the water running in the sink. Then, quietly, he said, You always made things feel bigger, Mom. Every event, every memory, you'd hold on so tight. Sometimes I think that's why I stayed away. I didn't know how to live without feeling guilty for moving forward. His words landed like stones. I just wanted to love you, I whispered. I know, he said, and his voice cracked. But sometimes love feels like a weight you can't carry forever. I turned off the faucet. Then maybe I taught you the wrong kind of love. He didn't answer. When I turned, he was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. For a moment, I wanted to reach out, touch his face like when he was little, tell him everything was okay. But it wasn't, and pretending would only make it worse. Instead, I dried my hands and said, You should check on Emily. She's probably wondering where you are. He nodded and left the kitchen without looking back. That night, after they went to bed in the guest room, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. I could see the faint glow of their window upstairs. Two silhouettes moving softly against the curtain, their world, now separate from mine. I thought about what Ben had said, about love being a weight. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd mistaken holding on for loving. Maybe I'd built my life around a version of motherhood that didn't know when to stop giving. The night deepened. Somewhere, a train passed, a lonely, distant sound that made the world feel smaller. I whispered into the dark, You'd know what to say, David. But no one answered. The next morning, I found Emily sitting at the kitchen table alone, sipping coffee. Her hair was messy, her face bare, and for the first time, she looked young, uncertain. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She smiled faintly. No, Ben's still out. I poured myself a cup and sat across from her. The morning light slanted through the window, catching the dust in soft gold beams. Can I ask you something, Margaret? She said. Of course. Did you ever feel like you lost yourself in being someone's wife? Or mother? The question startled me. Why do you ask? She stared into her coffee. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for him. He gets so quiet lately. I can't tell what he's thinking. I thought getting married would make things clearer, but it feels like he's drifting. I wanted to say he's always been like that. I wanted to tell her how he builds walls out of kindness, how silence has always been his armor. But instead, I said, marriage is just two people learning to live with each other's ghosts. Ghosts? I nodded. The things we carry from before. The love, the grief, the expectations. They don't go away, they just learn to sleep beside us. She looked at me for a long time, as if trying to decide whether I was comforting her or warning her. I think you understand him better than anyone, she said finally. I raised him, I said. But that's not the same thing. They stayed 2 more days. We went for walks by the lake, revisited the old diner Ben loved as a kid. For a while, things almost felt normal. But there were moments, small, fleeting, when I caught glimpses of something uneasy between them. The way Emily's hand would hover near his but not touch. The way he'd stare out the window too long. The arguments they didn't quite finish. On their last night, as we sat by the fire, Emily excused herself to bed early. Ben stayed behind, staring into the flames. She's good for you, I said softly. He nodded. Yeah. Do you love her? He hesitated. I want to. The words hit me like cold air. What does that mean? He took a deep breath. It means I'm trying, Mom. I really am. But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like I'm watching it happen from a distance. Then why marry her? Because she deserves someone who won't leave. Because I'm tired of running from everything. He looked up at me, eyes tired, pleading. You ever feel like you've been holding your breath for years? I nodded. Every day since your father died. He exhaled slowly. Then maybe we're the same after all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the soft creak of the floorboards upstairs, the faint murmur of their voices behind the door. I imagined their conversation, apologies, promises, silence. And then, suddenly, the sound of a door closing. Footsteps down the stairs. I got up and peeked out the window. Ben was outside, sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. I almost went to him. Almost. But something stopped me, the realization that this was his own breaking point, and maybe he needed to face it alone. So I turned away and let the darkness hold him. In the morning, when I came downstairs, they were both gone. No note, no goodbye. Just a half-empty coffee cup on the counter and the faint smell of his cologne still hanging in the air. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd gone for a walk. But as the hours passed, it became clear they'd left. And all at once, I felt it again, that same hollow space that opened up the day David died. Only this time, it was quieter, more familiar. Like the ache of an old scar. That evening, I found something on the porch table. A small photograph. Ben, Emily, and me, taken that weekend. We're all smiling, sunlight catching our faces just right. But when I looked closely, I saw it, the distance in Ben's eyes. The way his body leaned slightly away, as if already halfway gone. On the back, Emily had written in delicate handwriting, "Thank you for the home you built in him." I sat down, the photo trembling in my hands. And for the first time, I didn't cry. Because somewhere deep inside, I understood, love isn't always about being chosen. Sometimes, it's about letting someone go without making them feel like they are leaving you behind. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Ben again. The days stretched long and heavy, stitched together by routine. I went to church, watered the garden, sorted through old boxes in the attic. The kind of tasks that make time feel like it's moving, even when it isn't. But underneath it all, there was a hollow hum, the ache of unfinished sentences, the silence that followed his leaving. Then, one rainy afternoon, the phone rang. "Mom." His voice was tired. "Frayed." "Ben," I said, my throat tightening. "Where are you?" "Still in Seattle." I waited. He hesitated. "I needed to call. Things, they aren't good." Something inside me froze. "What do you mean?" "It's Emily," he said. "She left." The words came like a whisper, but they split the air open. "Left?" He sighed. "It's not what you think. We've been fighting for weeks. About everything. The wedding, the move, the way I keep pulling away. She says she can't keep trying to love a man who's always somewhere else." "And are you?" He was silent for a long time. Then, "Yeah, maybe I am." I didn't know what to say. My instinct was to comfort him, to wrap my voice around him like I did when he was a boy. But something stopped me. Some new, hard-earned understanding that this wasn't mine to fix. "Do you want me to come?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. I needed to tell you." We were quiet again. Rain pattered against the window. I could hear him breathing on the other end, slow, uneven. "Finally," he said, "she said something before she left. She said I don't know how to stay. That every time someone loves me, I start to disappear." His voice cracked. "Maybe she's right." I closed my eyes. "Ben," I whispered. "You've been running for so long, you don't even know what standing still feels like anymore." He didn't answer. "I think you've mistaken safety for distance," I continued. "You keep moving away so no one can leave you first." Silence. Then, softly, "Maybe I learned that from watching you." The words hit like a tide. "Me?" "After Dad died," he said. "You never really came back. You survived, sure. But you built walls so high no one could reach you, not even me." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "That's not fair." "Maybe not," he said. "But it's true." I wanted to argue, to tell him I'd done my best, that love sometimes looks like endurance. But even as the words formed, I knew he was right. I had survived by becoming untouchable, mistaking control for strength, distance for dignity. And in doing so, I had taught him the same. "Ben," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "I didn't mean to make you afraid of love." "I know," he said quietly. "But I think I am." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the rain still falling outside. The house felt heavier somehow, the kind of heaviness that doesn't come from grief, but from understanding. I thought about the years between us, the phone calls I hadn't made, the things I'd left unsaid, the way love had calcified into something too careful to be alive. And suddenly, I couldn't bear the walls anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove. The road to Seattle was long, wet, endless. The wipers kept a steady rhythm, thump, thump, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. By the time I reached his apartment, night had fallen. The city lights glowed like constellations, each window a small, private universe. I stood outside his door for a full minute before knocking. He opened it wearing an old grey t-shirt and that lost expression I remembered from when he was 15, after his first heartbreak, when he'd sat on the porch in silence, pretending he was fine. "Mom," he said, startled. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. The apartment was small, cluttered, unsteady, boxes half open, dishes piled up, the faint smell of rain and unwashed laundry. "Looks like you've been busy," I said gently. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "If by busy you mean falling apart, then yeah." I looked around. "Where's Emily?" "Gone to stay with her sister." I nodded. "Do you want to talk about it?" He shrugged. "Not really." "Then we don't have to." We sat on the couch in silence. The city hummed outside, the sound of a world still turning, indifferent to heartbreak. After a while, he said, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I just kept everything calm, simple, no big emotions, things would be okay. But she wanted more. She wanted all of me. And you didn't know how to give it." He looked up. "How did you do it? After Dad? How did you keep going?" "I didn't," I said. "I just kept existing. There's a difference." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I used to think you were the strongest person I knew." "I'm not," I said softly. "I just got good at pretending." He turned toward me then, really looked at me. For the first time in years, I saw the boy he'd been, the man he was, and the broken line between them. "I don't want to keep pretending," he said. "Then stop." He laughed, shaking his head. "It's not that easy." "No," I said. "It never is. But you can start small. Tell her the truth. Tell her you're scared. Tell her you don't know how to stay but you want to learn. People can forgive a lot when they know you're trying." He was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "And you? What about you, Mom? What do you want?" The question caught me off guard. "I want to stop being afraid of being alone," I said. "Because maybe being alone isn't punishment. Maybe it's the beginning of something else." He smiled sadly. "You sound like Dad when you say things like that." "Then maybe he's here, somewhere," I said. "Listening." Later that night, after Ben went to bed, I stood by the window watching the rain. The reflection of the city flickered on the glass, neon blues and golds blending into soft blurs, like old memories refusing to fade. For the first time, I let myself think about David, not as the man I'd lost, but as the man who had taught me how to love without holding on too tightly. I remembered one night, years ago, when Ben was still a child and the three of us had driven out to the coast. David had built a fire on the beach, and Ben had fallen asleep between us, sand clinging to his small hands. David had looked at me then and said, "You know what the hardest part of love is?" "What?" "Letting it keep changing." I hadn't understood then. But now, watching the rain blur the world outside my son's apartment, I did. Love wasn't something you preserved. It was something you survived, again and again, until it softened you into understanding. In the morning, I made coffee while Ben slept. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt clean, like the air after a storm. When he finally came out, his eyes were red but calmer. "Thanks for coming," he said. "You don't have to thank me. I'm your mother." He nodded. "I called Emily last night." "Oh." She didn't pick up. But I left a message. Told her the truth. All of it. For once. I smiled. "That's enough." He looked at me, uncertain. "Do you think she'll come back?" "I don't know," I said. "But even if she doesn't, at least you'll be standing still when she looks for you." He exhaled, long and shaky. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Yes, you do," I said gently. "You'd live. You'd grow. You'd learn. And one day, you'd forgive me." He laughed softly, and for the first time in months, it sounded real. That evening, before I left, we walked down to the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and rain. Boats rocked gently against the pier, their lights flickering in the mist. Ben stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "You think Dad would have liked her?" "Emily?" "Yes. Very much." He nodded. "I think so too." We stood there in silence, watching the waves fold into one another. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the quiet. When we finally said goodbye, he hugged me, a real hug, not the quick, polite kind. The kind that says I see you. I forgive you. I'm trying. And maybe that was enough. Driving home, the road shimmered with the last traces of rain. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through my hair. For once, I didn't feel old or lonely or left behind. I just felt alive. When I reached home, the house no longer felt like a tomb. It was just a place, full of echoes, yes, but also space. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sky was beginning to clear, streaks of pink and gold melting into blue. And I thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks. Not closure. Just quiet acceptance. I picked up my journal and began to write. He said love is a weight. Maybe he was right. But maybe it's also the wings we build when we finally learn to set it down. I paused, looking out at the fading light. Somewhere far away, a train passed again, softer this time, almost tender. And I whispered to no one in particular. We're all learning how to stay. Autumn came early that year. The air turned sharp, the mornings silver with dew. The trees on Willow Lane began to burn gold, then copper, then bare. Every evening, the light lingered a little shorter, as though the sun itself were learning to let go. I liked it that way. The house, this old, breathing thing, felt gentler now. I'd repainted the porch, replaced the squeaky hinge on the screen door, and finally taken down the faded wreath that had hung there since David's funeral. It wasn't about forgetting anymore. It was about making room. I started volunteering at the community center twice a week, teaching kids how to plant vegetables, how to keep things alive with patience. There was something grounding about the dirt beneath my fingernails, about watching things grow because you finally stopped trying to control them. One of the little girls, Ava, asked me once, "Miss Maggie, are you married?" "No," I said, smiling. "Not anymore." "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I said. "But missing someone means they mattered." She nodded, thoughtful in that way only children can be, and went back to planting marigolds. Ben called more often after that. Not every Sunday, but enough. Sometimes just to tell me about a new project at work, or a book he'd started, or how he'd gone hiking alone and actually liked it. He sounded lighter, like someone learning how to breathe again. One night, he said, "Emily and I have been talking." I felt my chest tighten. "Oh, yeah. She came by last week. We had coffee. It was good. Quiet." I told her I was in therapy. Told her I was working on things. "That's wonderful, Ben." She said she still needs time. I told her I'd wait. But for once, I'm not waiting like before. I'm living, too. I smiled, tears pressing at my eyes. That's all any of us can do. He hesitated. "You sound happy, Mom." "I think I am," I said. "Or at least, peaceful." He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "I'm glad." That winter, I took a trip to the coast, the same one David and I had taken Ben to when he was little. The beach was nearly empty. Just gulls circling above and the endless sound of waves folding into themselves. I brought a thermos of coffee, a blanket, and the photograph Emily had left on the porch, the one of the three of us. I set it on the sand beside me, anchoring it with a smooth white stone. The wind bit at my cheeks, but it felt good, honest, alive. I thought about everything that had led me here. The years of loving too tightly, the silence that followed loss, the day my son got married without me, and the long road to forgiveness. It struck me then, how none of it was wasted. Every heartbreak, every empty room, every unanswered call had carved out a space inside me. And that space, I realized, was not emptiness. It was capacity. The capacity to love without possession. To remember without drowning. To live without clinging. That evening, I sat in my car watching the last of the light fade behind the horizon. The sky turned from gold to violet to deep blue, the kind of blue that feels infinite. I thought about David again. If he were here, I think he'd laugh at how dramatic I'd been all these years. He'd kiss my forehead, call me Maggie May, and say something like, "You did good, sweetheart. You kept going." And maybe, for the first time, I'd believe him. I whispered into the dark, "I'm okay now." The wind moved through the dunes, soft and sure, like an answer. Spring returned quietly. The first daffodils bloomed along the fence, the robins came back, and the house filled once again with light that felt like hope. On a Saturday morning in late March, I opened the front door and found a small package on the porch. No return label, just my name written in Ben's handwriting. Inside was a framed photograph. It was the same picture, me, Ben, and Emily, but now there was something new behind it, a handwritten note. "We're taking it slow. Learning how to stay. Thank you for teaching me how to begin again. Love, Ben." I sat there for a long time, the photo trembling in my hands, the sunlight pouring in through the curtains. And then, without meaning to, I started to laugh, a soft, broken, joyful sound. Because somehow, against every odds, we'd made it here. Not perfect, not whole, but still standing, still trying. I hung the photo on the wall in the hallway, beside one of David holding a much younger Ben on his shoulders. 2 generations of men I'd loved, and somehow, finally, learned to release. I stepped back, looking at them both, and felt something shift inside me, a quiet, steady warmth. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was belonging. To myself. To the life I'd built, cracks and all. Now, when people ask about my family, I tell them this. My husband was a good man. My son is learning how to love. And I am learning how to live with both the leaving and the staying. Sometimes they look at me strangely, not understanding. But that's all right. Some truths are meant to be felt, not explained. One Sunday, months later, Ben and Emily came to visit again. They pulled up in the same silver sedan, but this time, the air around them was different, easy, quiet, kind. Emily carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Hi, Mom," Ben said, hugging me. "We brought lunch." "Thank God," I said, smiling. I was about to burn another roast. We laughed, all 3 of us, and it was the most natural sound in the world. Over lunch, Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We're glad to be here," she said. And I realized, so was I. No more ghosts between us. Just people. Trying. Loving. Beginning again. That night, after they left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The moon hung low, soft and silver, brushing light across the garden. I thought of every version of myself that had lived inside this house. The young bride, the grieving widow, the lonely mother, the woman learning to be whole again. And for the first time, I felt love for all of them. Even the broken ones. Especially the broken ones. Because they had all been trying, in their own imperfect ways, to do the same thing, to stay open when the world kept closing. I picked up my journal one last time and wrote, "There is no ending, only quieter beginnings. Love doesn't die. It changes form, from hands, to memory, to air. And when we finally stop chasing it, we realize it's been here all along. In the light, in the silence, in the simple act of staying." I closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the darkness settle around me, not as absence, but as peace. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, whispering like an old friend. And I whispered back, "I'm still here."